This process of investigating the nature of identity, the process of investigating the nature of truth, living truth, the dharma, whatever you call it or don't call it, really is one of investigating the nature of identity itself. It really comes back to that, no matter how you slice it, in my experience. So, from the beginning, uh, from the place of human suffering, the life of quiet desperation, recognizing that something feels just off about what I perceive to be my life or myself. Uh, it's really an identity game that appears in various ways. It may appear as this shame that I have that I don't know what to do with, or it may appear as a, an uncomfortable, uh, unsatisfying sense that just seems to pervade my life or pervade my sense of me. It may arise as a life that seems unmanageable in some way. And sometimes it arises through its sort of transmission. Come into contact with a book, The Power of Now, or you will randomly find a video on YouTube talking about non duality, or maybe not even something that direct, but you have a disruption in your life. Disruption meaning something that pulls the rug out, that shows you in gritty detail that you're not in control of your life in the way you thought you were, and or that your life is not necessarily going to go the way you thought it would. This comes in many forms. Uh, Loss of loved ones is a common one. Illnesses, big career disruptions certainly can do it. But with the disruption, something shines through, something that says, whatever track I've been on, whatever I've been convincing myself is the meaning of life or the purpose of life, the purpose of me, it's really not getting to the heart of the matter. Something else here. And that may be what calls us to this kind of work or this kind of investigation. So, from that place, it may not be obvious immediately that it's a matter of identity, a matter of really investigating who and what you are or what you take yourself to be. But sooner or later, it will typically dawn on a practitioner that it is about the identity structure. It's about what I've been taking myself to be. A simple way of looking at it would be like through a kind of psychological paradigm where you realize that all of the problems you've been trying to solve year after year, all the fires you've been trying to put out in your life, uh, they all point back to you, right? You kind of look in the mirror and you're like, wow, I've been the one causing the problems. uh, Even if even as I'm solving problems, it's like in a sense I'm causing more problems. Uh, or even the perception of a problem. Why is that arising? Why am I struggling? Why am I struggling with myself? Why am I struggling with others? So even from a straightforward psychological paradigm, it often surfaces that the issue is one of identity, and this um, can be a kind of maybe confusing place at first because strangely being hypnotized by the social matrix, we'll call it, uh, there's really no value placed on investigating who or what you are. In fact, most of the information and messaging you get from the social matrix is not overtly, but covertly telling you to do exactly the opposite. It's telling you to distract, telling you to judge others, telling you to project some false image of yourself. All of this is just constantly messaged to us. It's kind of hilarious, I think, when you see it clearly and realize it's pretty ubiquitous. It's around us all the time. And it's not just the big bad advertisers or marketers or influencers that are doing it. We're all doing it. And we do it when we talk to each other. And we do it even internally, right? So these mechanisms of thought, mechanisms of self-perception, mechanisms of communication, we see are inherently flawed. Paul Hederman has a nice thing. He says the thought system is a failed system. Just see that, it's in a funny way, but it's kind of true. It doesn't work in the way we want it to, or the way we think it does. And so, yeah, it can be daunting, confusing when you realize, okay, I need to take up some kind of investigation into who I am or who I've been taking myself to be all these years. But how in the hell do you do that? Right? How do you do that? How do you actually do that? Because again, if you take inventory, it seems like most people don't know how to do it and don't want to do it. Right? I hear this from people not too uncommonly who are sort of oriented the way we are to awakening and so forth, spirituality. That when they were children, they had this instinct. There was something about their nature they just knew to ask the deepest questions, the identity questions, the really juicy questions, and they were often shut down for doing so. Their parents thought they were a little nutty or got scared, or I've even heard of people being sent to like therapists and psychiatrists because their parents thought they were having neurologic problems or psychological issues because they were experiencing essentially non-duality. So I've heard all kinds of variations of this, but we're taught at a pretty young age, like, whatever you do, whatever you go out there and do in life, whatever you chase and pursue, it's all good. Just don't actually look at who you are. Don't do that. Right? That's just dangerous or off limits. It seems crazy when you say it that way, or when I say it that way, but I know it's also true. And when you start to take this investigation up, you'll see that you may not have a lot of support in your family and friends, which leads to another very common question I get. How do I get my family to understand this? How do I talk to my friends about it? And my answer is usually some version of the unsatisfying, simple answer: don't. Like, why would you want to? You'll learn pretty quick it doesn't really work. Right? Talk to them about anything but that. So they don't want to hear it. They don't get it. It's not even that they don't get it. I think at some level they do get it. They just don't want to hear it because it's almost, conversation has that flavor to it where there's almost a complicity, right? If I'm really vibing with you, then we got to be on the same page about something. And if you're talking about identity with someone, they're not going to want to vibe with that. It's going to be uncomfortable with someone who's not into it, right? I mean, we all know, everyone in this room knows this. So yeah, I mean, early on, often people are like, "Oh, I love this. I read Eckhart Tolle, and the trees were singing to me, and everything is one." And I just, how do I tell my friends about this? Like, well, just go try for a while and come back and tell me how that went for you. I know they need it. Like my sister needs this so bad. My mom, God, she needs it so much. She needs to wake up. How do I help her wake up? I've had people do this, like their kids. They want me to help them figure out how to help their kids wake up. It's like, yeah. So, but that's kind of the deal, right? You start talking about investigating your true nature and your identity, and people look at you cross-eyed, or you may actually luck out, and someone, even a partner, could be truly interested in that. That's really cool. But I would say the majority of people, it can be pretty off-putting. And yet we know we gotta do it. We gotta look into it. So then how do we do it? How do we look into the nature of identity? It's a really good question. Like, to me, even right now, the question is fascinating. It's always interesting. I talk to person after person after person on stage doing Q&As, and we're talking about one version of that or another every time, right? The question of identity for me is clear. It's not hidden at all. It's the least hidden thing there is. And yet, when I talk with someone, it's kind of talking through that someone that feels like that's who they are to them, and finding an entry point, or finding something that feels fixated and just kind of working on that, or just helping people realize like whatever's happening is fine. When you merely make the intention to investigate your identity, a lot of stuff is going to start happening, and you really aren't in control of it. So a lot of this is just about saying, yep, that's totally normal. That happens. These intense fears happen. These, strange emotions and self-perceptions you didn't know you had come to the surface. That happens. All these things happen, right? So a lot of it that I do is just kind of saying, hey, yeah, it's normal to go through this. Trust your instinct. Trust what initially aligned you to this process of investigation, and it will continue to carry you forward, carry you through. Because I trust that. So I just try to help other people trust it. And that's a big part of it. That's a big part of the answer of like, how do you go about investigating your identity? Well, learn to trust your initial instinct to do so, however that arose. If it arose through intense suffering, if it arose through curiosity, if it arose through an ayahuasca experience, if it arose through reading a book, it doesn't really matter. It's pretty immaterial how it arose. But the mere fact that some instinct to investigate your true nature has arisen is, and I don't think I'm putting too sharp an edge on it, it is the ultimate gift to you. The ultimate gift in this lifetime, truly, is, for whatever reason, however the heck it happens, that you have the instinct to actually investigate your true nature in an earnest and thorough way. If you have that instinct, then it doesn't matter if you go live in a monastery for 20 years, or if you are a householder with children and a busy life and work full time, or if you go to meditation retreats all over the world and travel, or if you almost never meditate, but you have a burning desire to really, really untie the problem of identity and to get to the roots of suffering. It doesn't matter what path. There are many paths, you could say. The path is really just a side effect. The path is an afterthought. The investigation that's oriented, the investigation that is fueled by that initial instinct, however the heck that happened, that's 90% of it. It's again and again reorienting to that initial instinct that says, who am I? Or what is this? What is the nature of reality itself? What is truth when it's unfiltered by mind and thoughts and beliefs and conditioning? What is truth that is alive right now? What is the nature of presence without any spiritual concepts, without any baggage, without any memories? What is presence, right? Whatever the question is. It can be different questions for different people. I have a whole chapter in my book on inquiry and formulating questions. But the question, in a sense, is secondary to that initial prompting. So we can always go back to this basic, back to the basics of inquiry, and then back to the basics of intuition that's aligning you to continue to investigate one moment and another moment and another moment. And that's the beauty of this meeting like this, is that there are 290 different stories and paths here, situations, lifestyles, everything from poor to wealthy, from householder to renunciate, monk, all ages, all different personality types, artistic to scientific, tending towards atheist to tending toward devotional. All that's here, political spectrum, all of it. And none of that even matters. there is something we clearly have in common. If you've made it 4 or 5 days into retreat, it's there. And that is your instinct to investigate your identity, the nature of identity. So, how does the rubber meet the road when it comes to investigating identity? Well, pretty quickly, when you're taking up this challenge, this is the challenge of all challenges in life, you will find something. You may find Ramana Maharishi. You may find Rupert Spira. You may find Yogananda. You may find Christian mysticism. You may find Eckhart Tolle. Who knows? You may find Dzogchen. You may find Mahamudra. You may find Advaita Vedanta, Zen. You may find a specific teacher that doesn't have a particular lineage or does have a lineage, but just teaches and transmits in a very direct way. And if it's a good teacher, meaning a teacher who has really solved the problem of birth and death for themselves, then you're in luck. That's a good thing. That's a very powerful transmission. It's an auspicious situation, but you don't need that necessarily. So all of these can be workable ways of investigating the nature of identity. Are there better and worse ones? I mean, I think in the relative sense, there probably are to various degrees, but more importantly, there are probably better and worse choices for you in particular. Eckhart Tolle in his book does say this. He has this nice analogy of there's a log that's on fire. The fire we could say is enlightenment or liberation. And if you put another log next to it that's not burning, that log will start burning. And if you take it away, the fire may go out. You put it back and the fire will start again. But at some point, the fire on that log will continue to burn on its own. And this is the analogy for essentially like Dharma, Buddha Dharma Sangha, a teacher, having a good realized teacher, and or a sort of Sangha, maybe Dharma brothers and sisters who are realized. But just being around people who are realized does have a powerful effect, for sure. So that is undoubtable in my experience. Now, as I wrote in my book in a chapter on teachers, there are potential pitfalls for that. If it gets too devotional, there can be major problems, of course. If the teacher is abusive, it can be major problems. If the teacher's not awake, there can be, stagnation and so forth. And all of this happens all the time. So yeah, you still. So how do you check in with that? How do you check in with that? How do you know if it's working? What the teacher you're working with or the group you're working with, do you see fruition? That's the number one. Are people really waking up? Do you see people waking up in that sangha, in that group, in working with that teacher? I would say that's primary. Of course, do you see abuse? Do you see anything that's really a red flag? Then that's a concern as well. And if that's not super clear, just check in with your instinct again. The same instinct that started this out for you. I do see on occasion people who do work with a certain teacher or in a certain group, certain, center or temple or something, and they kind of come to the end of what that situation can do for them. Like a teacher can lead you a certain distance sometimes, but that may run out. And this, I'm kind of cautious to say this. I don't want to insult anybody or any teacher or anything, but it just happens. Like you may kind of outgrow your teacher, and just be open to the possibility that can happen. There are many stories there are many old Zen stories about this happening, where a monk travels to find a teacher and sits with a teacher for 10 years, and then keeps looking, goes out and keeps looking for another teacher, and then they finally find their final teacher. It's much easier today than that, of course, but it does happen. And I see people getting a little stuck there sometimes in that they feel committed to their teacher, committed to their school, committed to their tradition, whatever it is, and they feel like they're doing, I don't know, the teacher a disservice or the dharma a disservice by moving on, you know? So again, check in with your instinct. What does your instinct say about this situation? In my opinion about teachers, a teacher's deeply realized and really is concerned only with your realization. They're not going to try to hold on to you. They're not going to try to guilt you into staying with them and, avoid other teachings or teachers or moving on. They should encourage you to do what works for you. Yeah. Yeah, in my opinion, but I think there are many practical examples I've seen of that. Uh, so find the resources you need. Life is short. You don't know how long you're going to be here. So once you've taken this up, be an advocate for yourself. Find the resources you need. Go where you need to go. Meet who you need to meet. Do what you need to do. And when, as they say, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I think that's reasonably true. Now, um, when we talk about realization, for me, one of the most salient or one of my favorite, I suppose, uh, orientations is freedom from extremes. I find this to be accurate, that liberation ultimately is freedom from extremes. And there are extremes of teachers. We can be extreme on the devotional side. We want the teacher to give us little tastes of enlightenment all the time, but we don't want to really look in the last place we want to look. We don't want to do the really hard work. That's one extreme. Another extreme is I don't need a teacher. I don't need to be close to anybody. I need to do this myself. It's not authentic and it's not sincere unless I do all the work myself. Well, there is a truth to that, but what a justification is a thin skin of truth stuffed with a bald-faced lie. The bald-faced lie is you just don't want to be exposed to somebody who's going to show you things about yourself you don't want to see. That's often what's happening there. So that's another extreme, right? So just be alert to the extremes there. Overly devotional, overly serving, maybe overly, I don't know, expecting the teacher to do it for you somehow, cast a spell on you. And there are huge groups built around this kind of stuff, right? Everybody worshiping the guru and stuff it's big. It's a big business. And again, on the other side is the rugged, independent spiritual seeker who doesn't need anybody and doesn't need a teacher. So yeah, if you find yourself falling into either of these extremes, just be aware that it can be a hindrance. It can slow things down for you. So yeah, that's the teacher Buddha part of the Buddha Dharma Sangha. Dharma being the teaching itself, right? The transmission, and the Dharma, right, is really the embodiment and the living energetics growing out of that initial instinct that drove you to this in the first place, that oriented you to awakening in the first place. That's the Dharma, right? And it's interpreted as the teachings themselves, perhaps doctrine. Maybe you could say books and the Pali Canon and ancient teachings and wisdom and all of it. And that's one form of it, but it's also the instinct to continue to orient your life to truth. The instinct to let your practice or your spiritual life flower from being a part of your life that is just like other parts of your life that you have to balance with other things, letting it flower from that. And it'll start that way. It'll often feel that way at the beginning for many people, and letting that flower into it being actually the most important thing, right? The Dharma, or the orientation to truth, or your own unbinding from delusion, whatever it is for you. until it's really seamless with life. There's not a way to actually differentiate. Like spirituality doesn't make sense anymore. What is spirituality, right? It's kind of everything. But even to say that is a little bit much because it's just so life is so infused with truth, right? So there's a spectrum there. And as we mature in, let's say, spirituality, as we mature in this process of unbinding, of investigation, it generally does go that way where the dharma, so to speak, the orientation to truth is just infused in everything. And more our life orients toward that, however that is. And it doesn't have to look any specific way. This tripped me up a little bit when I was younger because I thought it just meant it has to look like turning into like a renunciate lifestyle. I'd have to give away all the possessions and become a monk and all this. And that could happen, but in today's world, that's much less equivalent with spiritual awakening than it used to be, for sure. So, so even your own ideas of what that will look like to live a life infused with orientation to truth, you have to be let go of because you can't really know what it's going to look like. I think it was yesterday we did the heart-based meditation and metta talk. Talked about unconditional love when it starts to flow in your life. And actually somebody up here that came on stage, I talked to you last night, described this where when unconditional love starts moving through, it's really awesome in a way, but it's also intimidating because you realize your expectations and your drives and desires that are sort of personal to you may or may not be part of that. And your life will start to become reoriented in various ways. And that can be a bit daunting. But it is also, I think, the natural maturing of this process or this pathless path. And then the third leg is Sangha, Buddha Dharma Sangha. So teacher, teaching, and then community. Sangha meaning sort of community. If it was a temple, it would be a group of monks. Sometimes if it's a satsang group, it's the group that shows up and sits in the fire of truth. But it could be this community, could be your local group of meditators. But it's also, and it is all those things. And there is value for sure to having a physical sangha, a physical group. So it's very noticeable on retreat, certainly early on. Most people can't meditate round after round after round by themselves at home with no one else there. We'll get distracted too easily and so forth. So it's really nice to have a group of people around you that hold you to it, so to speak, who have also put aside other distractions and other responsibilities to sit. And because they're sitting, you're sitting, and because you're sitting, they're sitting, and it allows you to take your practice into a deeper place than you normally would otherwise. And for some people, they can do that on their own. I think that's less common, but sure. But it is valuable to have that group, the physical group around you, supportive group, and there's also the bigger sense of sangha, for me at least, and that is the collective energetics of all of the matriarchs and patriarchs down through history and all of the people alive today who are orienting to truth and waking up and sacrificing and investigating and digging in and questioning beliefs that are no longer helpful and or have even been destructive in their life. There's an energetic to that. There's a collective support, and you feel it strong in a room like this. You feel it strong, maybe even in online retreats or online satsangs or whatever. But even when you're not in the physical environment of a bunch of other people who have this orientation, the more you recognize, acknowledge, and orient to that collective sangha that is uh, part of human consciousness, the more I think it shows up in your life. The more you tend to randomly meet people who are as interested in waking up as you are, or you find yourself at retreats and you make friends and so forth. So there's a huge value to that as well, of having a sangha, um, and trusting that even though much of the messaging we get from the world, from those around us on a day-to-day basis, is quite the opposite of what we're interested in our heart of hearts, more and more we recognize and feel supported by the sangha of those who are doing this work. And I think today more and more people are doing it. The real work of awakening, I think, is becoming much more common. I have no way of studying that or proving it, but it's my sense. Maybe it's just my sense from a biased sample of being online and so forth. But certainly the internet has made it uh, far easier to find realized people to interact with, far easier than even 30 years ago, certainly hundreds of years ago, when you had to travel weeks or months to find a temple and may find a teacher who's not particularly awake and then have to travel again and again. Uh, so yeah, we have ready access to so much now, which is really wonderful. So the sangha of those who are waking up, investigating their true nature, is building and morphing and changing and evolving and so forth. But it's here for all of us, which is really wonderful. So those aspects all support this process for you. And even with all of that said, again, back to the basic, that simple orientation that allowed you to recognize that there are the footsteps of the ox, that there is a path, and you stepped one foot on that path. You can reorient to that at any moment, including right now, or when you're lost in your mind, or when you're meditating and don't know what to do. Just touch back into that orientation to truth, which is beyond Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. It is beyond the footprints of the matriarchs and patriarchs. And it's immediately available at all times to you. Simple, mundane, not hard to find, not complicated. That really is the Dharma treasure. That is living truth uh, in the most benevolent way, that you have access to your own promptings to wake up, to continue to wake up, to continue to clarify what you have realized, to continue to dissolve any identity structure, to continue to dissolve any fixation or reactivity. And every time we orient to that, life gives us material. It says, oh, here you go. You want to let go of another fixation? Here's one for you. You want to see some repressed material you didn't know was there? There you go. Keeps happening, right? Gets subtler and subtler and subtler for the most part. Can take time. It can get worse before it gets better for some people, for many people. But over time, it settles more and more. But the intention to continue to see that which is hidden, that which has been hidden by myself, that which has been hidden by perceptual filters, even if they've been dissolved. Um, that's the practice, on and on, endlessly. Suzuki Roshi, I think, just described it as always being willing to notice the mind weeds and pick the weeds. It's a deeply realized human being saying that. So, uh, yeah. So, as far as practical ways of investigating identity at the different levels, I'll kind of touch into some of these based on my experience working with people, my personal experience.